Hello, everybody!
Turn this up in my headphones, Charles.
Turning it up. Hello, everybody, one and all. Welcome to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, and not just any fantasy today, because today we are picking up one of our recommendation series episodes, and this one is our favorite audiobooks in fantasy. Now, Dylan, I know you and I are big audiobook guys. I usually have a physical book and an audiobook going at the same time. I love audiobooks. I've listened to several throughout my many commutes to and from work over the years, and I have a short list of some of my go-to favorites.
Yes, as do I here. I know we've got our shared document here, and there's definitely a lot of overlap. And yeah, I think that's been the way to do it, is kind of have this audiobook going while you're doing chores, having the commute or whatever. Then it's something you can just throw in while you're doing some of this mindless stuff. That's awesome. And then having the physical book to complement it. If you're trying to read as much as Charles, you and I try to with these like door stopper, Wheel of Time books and things like that.
Exactly.
It's like, it is good to be able to do some chores with it while having this available. And you and I are huge fans of audiobooks. We've been audiobooking for a long time. You and I feel like I've been audiobooking since I was a kid, back when it was books on cassette tapes. So this is a very near and dear to my heart episode, and I'm excited to get into this with you, Charles, because I know that it's near and dear to you as well.
Yes, nothing better. Like, one of the things that my go-to listening while I'm in the car is audiobook, and if not audiobook, podcast. But audiobook usually takes it these days because we have so much to read, and I am just super excited to get into it. And I think the one that we have to start with is the one that both of us would easily recommend as one of our favorite examples of audiobook narration of all time. We've already gone on the record multiple times praising this guy's work. I am talking, of course, about the legendary Stephen Pacey and his work on all of the first Law books by Joe Abercrombie. And yeah, no surprise we're dropping Joe Abercrombie right at the beginning, I don't think.
Yeah. No surprise at all. I mean, I can sometimes feel like we might sound a little bit like a broken record here with all the Joe Abercrombie talk, but how could we not be discussing Stephen Pacey's work here? Because this is literally my favorite audiobook. It's like my favorite audiobooks of all time for me, and Stephen Pacey does my favorite audiobook work of all time. And I know at least I get a little cagey sometimes about just saying favorite, number one. But for me, this is so far and away the performance that most speaks to me with the book series that is just so incredible by Joe Abercrombie, who we love so much and just can't stop talking about here. So I feel like, it's such a strong recommendation from me, and I know from you too, Charles, the way that Stephen Pacey just commits and all this stuff. It's like, my literal favorite audiobooks. And I just, I'm not usually one to just come out and say that strongly, but I feel it here.
Yeah, I agree completely. His commitment to the First Law characters and their voices, it makes it so entertaining. Since we've started the podcast, this has been my favorite audiobook experience of all the books that we've read so far, and a lot, like I'd say half of them that have been audiobook experiences for me, and it's no contest. The guy commits in every sense. And these characters in the First Law world are characters. Some of them can be quite like flamboyant. There's lots of jokes that are subtly, they're not like, he's able to transfer the jokes that are just like observational and written in in the dialogue and written in the narration, but he dictates them in such a way that the joke comes across, and it's so funny, and he understands the material so well, and I just always appreciated that about about his work.
Well said, Charles. And yeah, I love what you said there. The characters are really characters, and I think of like Glocta, for example, is
right.
One of Pacey's most impressive performances is with Glocta, and how he does that lispy sounding voice for Glocta when he actually speaks, but then there's this kind of like internal monologue in italics. If you read the text, there's italic stuff that's going on in Glocta's head directly, and then there's this different voice that he uses that's kind of a throwback to Colonel Glocta, who is this like big heroic guy who everyone admired, and then you have Glocta at the start of the First Law series has since been tortured and lost the use of a lot of his body parts. He's missing all these teeth, so he talks with that lisp, and you just get this discrepancy, and it really gets across that the dissonance for Glocta, just that inner turmoil that he feels, and as a character who's always asking himself, why do I do this while he's torturing people? So we'll keep it spoiler free in this recommendations episode, because we're hoping we can get some folks to give these audiobooks a try. And I'll say, Charles, you can speak to this really well, I know too, because I think you just recently started trying the audio books of these, but there's like, both of us read the physical copies before we read the audiobook versions. Correct. And it's a whole nother experience to read it with the audio, right, Charles?
Yeah, this is one of those times where you listen to an audiobook and it's an extra level of enjoyment, really. It's so much fun to hear his performance. It's very entertaining. It's a very fresh, modern way of digesting an audiobook. This guy commits to characters. He moves fast. It doesn't feel like, sometimes you listen to these audiobooks from like the 80s and you're just like, oh boy, this is like so boring. But this person is actually giving, like, it sounds like he's giving the performance of his life, which I get, it's like a great thing because he's just all in. Even like if there's like romantic scenes, he's all in. You have to listen to figure out what I'm talking about. But all you audiobook fans know what I'm getting at here. There's moments in these books you're like, man, this guy is not holding back at all. Whether it's, like you said, giving an inner dialogue to a character, a subtly different voice, giving the way you describe some of the description, because as we've mentioned, Abercrombie can be scathing through the narration about the characters that he writes, and Stephen Pacey's able to translate that, like deliver those lines in a way that just doubles down on that. It's so much fun, and just like the enthusiasm and the range of energy that he gives in these performances make it super exciting and super fun. And some of my favorite audiobook moments that we have, we've spliced out and used on this show before, just because we're so enamored by his performance. So big props to Stephen Pacey's work on the First Law series by Joe Abercrombie. I recommend.
Exactly, Charles. Yeah, and to your point, Stephen Pacey is an English actor. Mm-hmm. He's actually, I think most of his work is in the theater, and he's very experienced there. He's also appeared on TV shows and stuff like that. He was on Blake 7. I don't know if you hear that. Some other TV show. I haven't either. I'm on his Wikipedia page, full disclosure. And so he's a theater actor, and it does sound like he's giving a one-man play, basically, when he's doing these. And just like you said, Charles, those romance scenes definitely stick out, and sex scenes and things like that, where just the level of commitment is like a person playing all the roles in a play, and with a ton of, I don't know how to say it, like he's just got, I don't know how he captures so many different voices and so many distinct personalities. And he seems to have this ability to just find the voice that you, like, somewhere deep down knew that character must have, but wouldn't be able to find it yourself, if that makes sense. Because it's like, when we read those physical books, it's like we wouldn't have been like, oh, and Glockta definitely has a lisp, and he's definitely talking like this, and the internal monologue would sound different, but then you hear it, and you're just like, yep, that's exactly what Glockta would sound like. Right. So, Gorst is another one, and some of the other.
Oh yeah, Gorst. The commitment to
the
Gorst,
high pitch,
in some works is really incredible.
Who's got high pitched voice, Gorst.
So it's like, okay, this is a character that you have to speak like that now, high voice anytime he comes on,
and he will,
and he'll give it 110%. So I highly recommend, like, even if you've never read the First Lost series before and this is your first exposure to it, it's a great place to start with the audiobooks. It's like, I highly recommend it. Nothing gets lost in the translation, and I also think that's what makes it such a good audiobook. Sometimes you try and audiobook something, like I remember I tried to audiobook Malazan, and I was like, this is not happening.
That's a tough one.
This is not happening. I had to give up and like go back to the books, but nothing will be lost with Joe Abercrombie's work if by absorbing it through audio. So highly recommend.
Yeah, totally agree, Charles.
So that brings us to the next one on our list, and this is perhaps two of the most famous voice actors in the fantasy narration world, beloved by the community, tons of fantastic work under their belts, and I believe they were trained in the theater as well originally. I'm talking, of course, of Michael Kramer and Kate Redding, two icons in the industry, and I'm referring specifically to The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan, which was the way that I first digested the Wheel of Time series. Was I used to live on Long Island and commute into Manhattan. I had these 3-hour commutes every day, and that's how I listened to all books of the Wheel of Time. It took months, but it became like Michael and Kramer and Kate Redding just became the voices in my ear and part of my commute. And when they were over, I was like, oh my God, it's been like, almost 6 months and of me constantly listening to these guys, and now it's gone. I felt a real loss when those books were over. And that just speaks to their incredible performance, and the decision to split up male and female characters with a male and female voice actor is really brilliant and brings a lot of extra voice to a series that has hundreds, if not thousands, of characters that they need to make voices for. So the fact that they're able to deliver on that is really incredible. And then the fact that they're actually a couple in real life and have a family, it's just that extra level of wholesome that I really appreciate. So, I mean, no surprise here to be recommending Michael Kramer and Kate Redding. And Wheel of Time's a great place to go to get a chance to appreciate their work if you haven't already.
Totally agree. Again, Charles, that's so well said. And I think it's something that is really, really cool that they're a couple, like you said, and you think maybe that's necessary at a certain point to split the POVs across 14 books and that prequel. I'm sure they did that prequel too, right? So it's like, or maybe one of them then. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. But for at least 14 books, those two have done together for Wheel of Time, and I've listened to a lot of those audiobooks. They're so long that it definitely helps to be able to listen to those. And even if you are reading it, to go back and forth can be helpful, and just get a change of pace. And I'll also say that my introduction to the Michael Kramer, Kate Redding duo, Charles, actually was not Wheel of Time, because they do the same thing for the Stormlight Archive, which is Brandon Sanderson's, we've said, magnum opus. You've yet to read that one, Charles, but I might be bringing it in for Friends Pitching Fantasy. Who knows?
That's exciting.
And yes, and I'll say that it's really cool seeing them balance these voices throughout another preposterously epic, sprawling series. And I don't know. There seems to be no one else quite in the game that people like in the game. There's no one else quite as, I guess, they're the first people you think of when it comes to these sprawling epic fantasies, is what I'm trying to say. It's like we need people to be able to cover these huge worlds with more characters than I know I feel like I can keep track of. But somehow Kate Redding and Michael Kramer, they find a way to do it, and they do it again with Stormlight, and they do it extremely well. And there's so much more we could say, but their voices are just
and there's the Wheel of Time Sanderson connection here as well, right? Because they Sanderson, famous for finishing the Wheel of Time, taking over for Robert Jordan after his passing, and then Michael Kramer went on to narrate the Mistborn trilogy, which is another one that was part of my commute that I really love. So at the time, I'm like, is this Michael Kramer guy like the only guy working in the game? But it's just that he's as prolific as Brandon Sanderson in this genre, and he's well-deserved as well. He's such a professional, and he comes in and can do a wide variety of casts. His voice as, say, Zed, which is a main character in Mistborn, I love so much. He just like really brought that character to life for me.
Right.
And for those of you that haven't read it, he's a main character. He has these verbal tics. He talks a little bit faster, a little bit lighter, a little bit higher register, and he always has the tick instead of I think, and it's it's fantastic. So that performance always stuck in my mind as well. And Mistborn's such a fantastic story. To hear it narrated by a pro like Michael Kramer was a really enjoyable experience, and I highly recommend the audiobooks for those as well. And it sounds like you'd recommend Stormlight.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, that can kind of go without saying, I feel like.
Anything with Michael Kramer or Kate Redding, you cannot lose.
And
those guys are pros.
Brandon Sanderson. So it's like, incredible. The point of views are, again, kind of rotated. I love Kate Redding, Shallan, and I love the way that Michael Kramer captures like Dalinar's voice and Kaladin. So it's great characters, and there's I guess I'm trying to think of the right word to describe that they are able to do so many different distinct voices, because I think of, I'm sure Pacey could range too, or whatever. Right, great range. I'm sure Pacey could too, but he's not being asked to cover that span of characters in the first Law book. So the thing that sticks out to me is that Kramer and Redding find a way to make every voice sound unique across
and able to recall it, because some of these characters, they're gone for a long period of time and come back, and it's like, oh, I know who they are by the sound of their voice. It helps with these series that have tons of characters. It's like, I know who's talking to who just by listening to how it's delivered by Kramer or Redding. And that like verbal cue can be super helpful with some of these series. So just another reason why audiobooking some of these series has its advantages. And certainly with Wheel of Time, with thousands of characters, that kind of ability to help recall some of these characters is super helpful.
Yeah, well said, Charles.
So let's move on. This is one that I'm very passionate about. This is a series that I've spoken up for occasionally on the show. It's been a while since I've mentioned it, so I'm very excited to be talking about it today. This is The Magicians trilogy by Lev Grossman. I love these books. I love this story very much, and my first exposure to it was the audiobook narrated by Mark Bramhall. And this is such a unique performance. The main character, Quentin Coldwater, the first line, Quentin did a magic trick and nobody noticed. This guy's kind of like a self-defeating, depressed in the background kind of guy. And Mark Bramhall's performance, he's kind of nasally, kind of detached, kind of pulled back. And it's a performance that's absolutely incredible. And then when he has to do characters that are like more funny, he has this hilarious delivery for some of these characters that fill these more comedic relief kind of roles, and he brings it. But he just embodies Quentin Coldwater so well in these beginning parts of the narration. Like if you just listen to like the free sample on Audible or something, you can get a sense of this guy's performance as the narrator in this story. It sticks out because when you listen to Michael Kramer, he's got that rich low voice, very dramatic, and you're like, whoa, this guy's epic.
They call that do they call that a baritone, Charles? You know these things better, right?
He's probably a baritone, I would say. Is like he's got a really rich, voice that makes him sound incredible for epic series like Wheel of Time. But for The Magician, something that takes place in like modern day New York, and it's the lead character is kind of a whiny teenager, right? Yep. It's a different kind. It's not like the epic hero of ages. It's Quentin Coldwater, the kid from Brooklyn. So when
the Holden Caulfield of fantasy, basically, right?
Right. So when you have that kind of a character, like it would be almost like a disconnect to cast some. I mean, Michael Kramer would probably do an excellent job. He's a professional. Yeah. But his voice would almost be too perfect, if that makes any kind of sense at all. And Mark Bramhall just nails it with this performance. I'm telling you guys, give it a listen to the sample. You get an instant idea of who Quentin is. You're like, oh my god, this guy's already annoying me, but in like the best way. That's what the whole series is about. This character's kind of annoying, but it's about his coming to terms with himself and all of these things, and it's so great. And to me, this performance is just so fun, and that's what I like about The Magicians by Lev Grossman.
Yeah. You grabbed my favorite talking point about this, which is that first line, which I love great first lines, and that one just sets you into Quentin Coldwater as a character who's this person who, he's just kind of in the background doing interesting things in the background, but no one's really paying attention to him because he's kind of hiding it, right? So it's like Quentin, he's like doing a coin trick kind of in his pocket, I think, and he's walking behind his friends. His friends are dating, and he's kind of like the third wheel.
And he's also like crushing on the girl too. Yes. So he's like, bummed about, he's complaining about that too, that kind of thing.
Right. But he's just kind of this understated guy dealing with depressive symptoms. It's not in the middle of some sort of persistent depressive disorder situation. And it's like, he's just trying to get by in this weird, I guess it's like an upper middle class New York life that he's living. Right. And and it definitely, there's some stuff that we're from New York, and there's some stuff that speaks to us for sure about that. And I think that I don't know. I always love the way that the audiobook narrator, that's Mark Bramhall. Bramhall. Yeah. He just captures that sort of like malaise. Is that a word?
Sure.
I guess it's coming. Ennui, Charles. Ennui, a listlessness. There's the so. I feel like you can just hear that in his voice, but he still manages to tell it still sounds like he's telling a compelling story. It's like a really good storyteller while still capturing that listlessness. And that's really hard to do. I do like how you differentiate him from Michael Kramer, who's like, let me tell you this epic tale with my deep, intense voice. And it's like, it's so much of audiobooking is finding the right narrator for that particular kind of story. And the next one we'll talk about definitely does that really well, but too. And I want to say, The Magicians, it's perfectly captured by Mark Bramhall's voice.
Definitely check out The Magicians by Lev Grossman. Such a great work of literature. But this one, Dylan, I have not listened to, and you have. So I think you should take over here and introduce our next audiobook.
The next one is The Kingkiller Chronicle by Patrick Rothfuss, narrated by Nick Podell. And so I've read this in multiple formats at this point. I usually like switching back and forth now between the physical and the audio. And Nick Podell, though, to me, even when I'm reading the physical book, Nick Podell is the voice I hear in my head for Quoth. And this is a very interesting story because we like to say about The Kingkiller Chronicle, if you haven't read it yet, it is... it's basically a man relaying his fantasy autobiography. Is a guy named Coat who's telling a story about when he was this figure that's become more myth than man, is what we like to say. He's more myth than man at this point, and now he's retired to this inn, the Waystone Inn, and he's going to tell his tale. And it's very interesting because the vast majority of the story then is a man relaying his own story of his life. And it starts to do this thing when it feels that way, where Nick Podell just in my head is Quoth's voice, because and Quoth himself is a person with a very theatric background from the Edema Rue who like put on all these plays and all this kind of stuff. So you buy in that when Nick Podell is doing all these different voices for different characters and all this stuff, it's like Quoth is performing it, a one-man play style. And it's then those moments are in first person, even though there's a larger frame story that's in third person. And those moments, it just feels like, oh, here's Quoth telling his story. And you get so lost in the audiobook because it's literally, it just feels like Quoth is telling you his story, like you're there in the inn hearing it. And it's such a beautiful way to take in a story with so much lyrical, incredible prose. And something that's interesting about Nick Podell is that he does not have that baritone, if that's what it's called, that deep Kramer-like voice. It's very distinct, and I do recommend folks like give the sample a listen. If you don't have to go buy an audiobook or whatever, just like go to Amazon or Audible and listen to that sample and see what it sounds like, because Podell is not what you typically think of with an audiobook narrator. It's he has a much higher pitched voice, but he has a very lyrical voice, and one that it makes sense that Quoth would have, as Quoth is his age is not clear, and I don't want to spoil things, and I also don't want to give my own nonsense speculations about the Kingkiller Chronicle, because you can go to plenty of other episodes for that.
We have tons of those.
But yes. So that being said, Podell's voice, it sounds like this kind of, what I imagine Quoth does not have a deep voice. He has this like lyrical singing voice that is just like beautiful, and he can serenade and all this kind of stuff. And Podell just sounds like what I think Quoth would sound like. And sound weird almost to have this like deep baritone voice for him, because he's like this sensitive guy, Quoth, like this sensitive lyrical guy. And I don't know, that's not how I think of him, but it's so intertwined in my head with how Nick Podell does it. But it's unique, it's distinct, because it's got unique, distinct Nick Podell voice reading unique, distinct Patrick Rothfuss lyrical, poetic writing. And there's just something about this audiobook that's not like any other one that I've ever heard. It's right. Beautiful.
Some of the things that I've read the Kingkiller Chronicles and loved it, but I haven't even heard the sample of the audiobook, so I don't know what's in store. But I guess I would say, one of the things that we champion about Kingkiller is the prose, obviously, and it sounds like what you're saying is that he's able to deliver like almost like this lyrical performance that gives justice to the prose. Because one of the things I'd be worried about is that you can't like digest the great turns of phrases and poetry that is the prose by Patrick Rothfuss when it's being dictated to you in audiobook format. You're saying that's not the case?
It just sounds like a poetic reading almost, I guess. It's like, give it a go, the sample there, Charles, and maybe the next time we'll reread that series.
Definitely.
That's without question, and I'd love for you to give the audiobook listen. And they're very long books too, so I think that they benefit in a similar way. It's a totally different feeling reading those books than reading The Wheel of Time, but they'll benefit from you can get a lot more done quicker, because we like to. It's a big ask to read 1,000+ page book in 2 weeks, I feel like, which is what we ask of ourselves a lot of times over here. And having that audiobook to balance out your physical reading, I just don't think you'd miss anything. I don't think you would. I think you'd just... And you listen to Patrick Rothfuss read the Slow Regard.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up.
Right?
Yeah, he did narrate Slow Regard, which is only 4 hours long or something like that. Yeah. And I thought it was great. He's got like a baritone voice for sure. And it's just like, how many opportunities do we get to hear the author dictate a story that he wrote, you know? So it's very fun to listen to that. And I was going to recommend that too for all you Kingkiller fans that haven't given Slow Regard a try yet. Audiobook's a great format for that. I have listened to that and I enjoyed it quite a bit. I mean, it's Patrick Rothfuss himself. How could you not at least give that a try?
Yeah. Yeah, I highly recommend too. And Slow Regard that's a book we love. It's a book that doesn't resonate for a lot of people. Not a ton of plot going on in there, but it's just you can tell it's a labor of love from Patrick Rothfuss, and it's a beautiful story. And if you love Ari, which we love Ari over here,
We sure do.
then yes, I think you'll enjoy that one. But it's a controversial one, but it feels like everything that Rothfuss touches is controversial for some reason. I mean, I don't know. I understand that people really want the third book. I really want the third book too, and it's tough for a lot of people to see that Rothfuss published an additional book in between, and I get that, but yeah. Yeah, we'll just do our thing where we say, let's, yes, I know, you want to recommend your audiobook. Sorry. Yes.
It's a New York Times
can take all his time.
bestseller, super famous, well-loved series. Cannot go wrong with the audiobook, it sounds like. I'm curious now to hear the performance of both Quote and Quoth, so I have to give that a try.
Yes. Yeah, we can keep it rolling, Charles. Sorry for that.
Let's keep it rolling.
Tangent.
There's a few more here that you've put on the list that I have not listened to, so I'll let you kind of drive us through these.
Yeah, sure. So the next one is The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey. I hope I'm saying that right. Narrated by Finty Williams. And this one actually won an Audi Award in 2015. And now it's like the Audiobook Awards. And it won it for Paranormal. And it's one of the next couple books that I'm recommending. It's like they're books that they're very hard to talk about without spoiling anything. So I'll just say that it's a dystopian feeling paranormal book. I was thinking maybe reading the back of the book. It's to give you a taste of it, but I'm not going to dwell on this one for too long because it's just too easy to spoil. And the next one's kind of like that too. But it won an Audi Award. It's got this beautiful like dystopian feel to it, and I don't know. There's something about this woman, Finty Williams' voice, that she just gets across that tone and that feel of the dystopia. I don't really know how to.
This was made into a movie, right?
Yes, it was made into a movie. I do recommend the movie. I think it's good, but not to be this guy, but I do think the book is stronger, and the audiobook is how I took it in, and it just, I don't know, it's this beautiful, almost like, I don't know, it's like this almost eerie tone to it that is captured by Finty Williams' voice, and yeah, I don't know, I'll just leave it at that. It's award winner, it's dystopian feeling, there's a movie that you can check out, and the tone is just perfect for it.
Awesome. That sounds great. And then there's one more here that you have.
Yeah, Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. Hope I'm saying his name right. Narrated by Rosalind Landor. And it's another sort of dystopian feeling book with a narrator who she just gets across that tone. It's more of, this one is a first person recounting of a person's story, and you kind of get to hear things unfold over time and figure out what actually is happening. It's taking place in England. It's got this wonderful British narrator, or at least she's doing a fantastic British accent if she's not British. And it's got this school setting. Again, it's dystopian, and there's this interesting balance of almost normalcy with which the narrator conveys the story, as well as like an awareness of some of the more messed up things that are happening. And I love these first person audiobooks because it really starts to take on the like, oh, I'm being told a story by the main character.
Oh,
and
yeah.
This one does that. Yeah. It's so yeah. Again, I want to give a shout out to the Green Team podcast, the Legendarium Green Team, because that's where I first heard about this book. It's got existential themes and romance and things like that. I think a lot of people would love it, and it's just a fantastic.
And this was a movie too, also, right?
Yeah, that one I can't I don't feel strongly about recommending to people because I started to watch that and it just felt to me personally like it didn't quite get the point of what the book was about, but that's my own taste.
It happens.
Go for it if you want. It just wasn't for me.
But the audiobook is.
Audiobook, fantastic. Highly recommend.
And then this next series coming up is one that we both listened to via audiobook and talked about long before Friends Talking Fantasy was ever a thing. I remember I was living in New Orleans at the time when I was listening to this, and just like while I was doing other things like going to the gym or going walking around, whatever. And I was just enraptured by this series. It's just a fun fantasy romp, but it's, a modern story. And it was written semi-recently. I'm talking about, of course, the famous Rhaenyra Revelations by Michael Sullivan, narrated by Tim Gerard Reynolds. And this is one like Royce and Adrian. These guys are a classic buddy duo, high charisma. They get into all kinds of shenanigans, and hearing the performance by Tim Gerard Reynolds, you really buy into that. And he makes it fun, and he makes those characters super likable. I mean, Michael Sullivan's dialogue and, his narration, his banter is incredible, but it's transcended by Tim Gerard Reynolds' performance. And that is such an important thing to nail for a book like Rhaenyra Revelations. And although it's been many years since I've digested this story, I still remember that performance and think very highly of it.
Well said, Charles. Yeah, you said the F word there, fun, which is totally what defines Tim Gerard Reynolds' performance in this audiobook for me as well. I was actually I was staying with my parents down in Florida when I was listening to these, and I was real sick, had strep throat actually. And these books I just sat there in my bed, lied there in my bed listening straight through with these books. And it really helped me get through that because they are so fun. And I lost myself in the witty banter and all the exchanges with Royce and Hadrian. And Tim Gerard Reynolds, you can just tell he's enjoying himself when he's telling this story. And it's hard not to enjoy yourself with the Rhaenyra Revelations. And if you do want to hear us talk more about that, we had an awesome conversation about why we love the Rhaenyra Revelations with Peter the Swordsmith, and who's a great reviewer as well. So
great insight into the Rhaenyra Revelations as well.
Fantastic insight, and drop some great lines. Turning the screw, right?
He's got some great isms there that I was very impressed by. So definitely check that episode out. I'm glad we got to talk Rhaenyra Revelations because it's one that we read a long time ago, that we talked about in depth a long time ago, and we have strong feelings for. And we were able to bring that into the show. So, agreed. I didn't know that you listened to that straight through while you were sick. That's a great story. I'm glad you're feeling better, buddy.
Yeah, that was a few years ago. Strep throat doesn't last that long, Charles. But thanks for checking in. I appreciate you. This was right after we talk about this sometimes. Right after I just immediately was like, Charles, check this thing out.
You recommended it to me, which is how I read it. Yeah.
And Mistborn was the reverse, by the way. We talked about Mistborn very briefly earlier in Michael Kramer's performance, but I'll say that's another one. I was visiting you in New Orleans when I was reading Mistborn, and Mistborn was you were the first of us to get into Brandon Sanderson, and you were like, dude, get got
a long drive back,
this
right?
train. Yes. So I drove back from New Orleans. So I drove to New Orleans with you and Chris, your twin brother, and I think we were just hanging out, talking, doing our nonsense the whole time. But then I drove back from New Orleans, and that was when I was living down in Florida at that time. So that's a long drive, New Orleans to Florida. And then the way back, I just listened. I lost myself in Michael Kramer's Mistborn, and I listened all the way through. So these audiobooks, I guess, they bring up, when I think of reading books, it's a less I guess there's less, you're usually just, that's the thing you're focused on.
Right.
But with these audiobooks, they bring me back to
they make you recall
in a different way.
Where you're
listening. Yeah. So I remember I would at night after before bed, I would read the Kindle version of Mistborn at your place in New Orleans. Yeah. And then I was like, okay, long drive back, audiobook the rest of the way. And I got through so much. So
That's awesome.
audiobooks, just love. I mean, it's so awesome. They bring up these memories. It's so good. And Rhaenyra does too, for sure.
Yeah, I recall my time in New Orleans with Rhaenyra Revelations, you recommending to it, me being like in the gym, fussing around. I didn't have Bluetooth headphones at the time, so I was fussing around with my AirPod, like my iPhone headphones. It's good times. But this next one, though, is in recent memory because I read this short story, while, part of the show not that long ago. We did an episode dedicated to this short story, but we had so much to say on it that it became a full episode. It's The Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu, and this is one of the stories in his collection of works called The Paper Menagerie and Other Stories, or something like that, by Ken Liu. And
exactly that.
We read the titular story, loved it, and there is a free audio track out there narrated by LeVar Burton for this story that I have not listened to, but I feel comfortable endorsing because the story's so good, and LeVar Burton is an entertainer and a stand-up guy. But Dylan, you have actually listened to it.
Right, yeah. On my third read of The Paper Menagerie, I can't get enough of this one. Because this is like a heart-wrenching story, and people who've been listening for a while probably know that for whatever psychological reasons that you can speculate on, I seem to seek out stories that cause me distress. And The Paper Menagerie causes distress in the best way, which is just freaking heart-wrenching and tender and raw. And I have cried from reading it twice, and I had the most recent time, the third time, which was the time we read for the show, I think I did LeVar Burton's narration of it, and it's so good. I mean, it's LeVar Burton, and LeVar Burton reading, so I think it's like, it kind of goes without saying, like you were getting at there, Charles. You don't really have to. You don't really have to have
it's an easy sell.
Heard it to know that it's going to be good, but I have heard it, and I just remember that time it was like I just read it again recently, and just single tear going down while LeVar Burton told me the end of the story, and you can tell he also talks, I think, some on it afterward about his own, like how he personally connects to the story,
right?
And it's a beautiful telling. You can tell it means a lot to him, and you get that wonderful LeVar Burton touch in addition to that incredible Ken Liu story.
Free,
so
and it's a handful of hours.
Free.
So all those reasons too. I mean, terrific.
Right.
If I had how long is the track? Like 4 hours, 5 hours? I'd be tempted to listen to that if I knew I had.
It's so short. It's so short. It's like
it's a handful of hours. It's not even 4.
See. Yeah, it's not. It's like at 1, I feel like.
Oh. Yeah, well,
I'll try to find it while we're doing it.
It's definitely worth it for sure, especially if you're just looking for something free and quick. And, like if you're just in the mood for a story and a short
52
story.
minutes, Charles. 52 minutes.
Super short. That's awesome.
It's probably shorter than this podcast is. And it's LeVar Burton's voice instead of mine.
And it's The Paper Menagerie instead of our ramblings. It's like it's an award-winning piece of literature.
Yeah, that's like the first one to ever, I'll probably butcher it, but it was like the Nebula, the Hugo, and one other or something like that. The first work of fiction to win all 3 awards.
It's just a great story.
Yeah.
So highly recommend listening to that. Then go back and listen to our episode where we discussed it because it's all good stuff all around and all free too. So it's just a lot of great content circulating out there on the internet. And another piece of content here I can't say I'm not familiar with, never read it. The Gentleman Bastard sequence, I guess, Dylan, that's a trilogy. That's like a fantasy story by an author named is that Scott Lynch? Is that right? I've never read the story, Charles. So I don't know what I'm saying here.
Yeah, The Lies of Locke Lamora is the first book. You might be familiar. So, it's narrated by Michael Page, and you might be familiar with this story because of the online petition to get you to read it by Benjamin at Literature and Lo-Fi. You remember that? You remember that petition, Charles? That
I do remember a bunch of people telling me to read the story. Haven't gotten around to it yet, though, but it sounds good. I'm working on it, guys.
We had...
I am aware that there is an online petition that is trying to get me to read this story.
So all these people have to listen. Like, we just did that. I'm very, very excited to get into the band series Kings of the Wild that by Nicholas Eames and stuff like that. But even that one, which a lot of people love, are very excited about, got some comments of people being like, when is Charles gonna realize why is it so hard to make happen? It's like, because I don't know, there's some sort of mental blockage going on there. Who knows what's happening? But yes, The Lies of Locke Lamora. If you do ever decide to actually read this, Charles, and I will be bringing this to Friends Pitching Fantasy. That is a certainty.
Well, there we go.
Yes, and this series, it's got some of the best dialogue for me that I've ever read in the entire genre. And it's witty, it's dark, it's funny, it's all these things. And there's something about Michael Page's performance that's able to capture this dark, somber tone while also having this witty banter. And I think that it's something that you, as a Joe Abercrombie fan, Charles, I feel like you would appreciate, is like some of these really dark moments and dark tone with these witty moments. And there's some, I don't know, Michael Page just captures the mood of this book extremely well, and Locke Lamora as a character. And it's one of those things that sort of what I was talking about with the Kingkiller Chronicle, where you start to make the voice of the main character just to you sounds like the reading voice almost, and like of the narrator. And Michael Page, he nails it. And I really think I highly recommend to all folks, whether you've read the Gentleman Bastard sequence already or not, to check out these audiobooks. Michael Page is just a wonderful performer in this, and it's a fantastic story.
The Gentleman Bastard sequence by Scott Lynch, narrated by Michael Page. Sounds pretty promising stuff. Yeah, maybe I'll check it out one day. It sounds good. We do have,
Charles,
we are
glutton for punishment.
We hear the people. Punishment. We're making, Dylan's gonna pitch it. Hopefully, that's what it's gonna take for us to read the series. So get on him, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
But I think we'll wrap it up with one last series here. And this one, to me, feels rather timely because we just did a discussion on one of these books with the lovely people over at Fiction Fans Podcast, and a trailer just dropped for season 2 of this widely popular television show. But before there was a TV show, before there was a Fiction Fans collab, before there was a video game series, there was the Witcher series, and the audiobooks are narrated by a voice actor by the name of Peter Kenny. And this series all hangs on Geralt and the voice of Geralt, and Peter Kenny just brings it. He nails that gravelly, low, stoic, yet also conflicted, thoughtful vocal performance of Geralt of Rivia, the titular character, the Witcher himself. And this is a character that I love and I champion all the time. I've gone on record saying he's often misunderstood, and that there's so much more going on in this character that kind of gets lost in the translation, I think, from Polish to English, and also just how he's become this super popular video game character too. So, but yeah, I feel like this performance in these Witcher series that Peter Kenny does of Geralt is the performance that a lot of these other performers, including Henry Cavill, kind of base their own voice for Geralt on. I know this audiobook was released before Witcher 3, but not Witcher 1 or 2, the video games. So I'm not sure who influenced who, but certainly this Peter Kenny vocal performance of The Last Wish in 2014-ish was like just so what I think of as quintessential Geralt, and it's really a trademark voice. It's got the gravelly, almost slightly supernatural feel to it, but still very intimidating. And also there's moments when he's talking to children or friends or family, he's got this very touching side, this very like exposed side of his voice, this vulnerable side that just rounds out this character in a way that just the books don't do a full justice of. And Henry Cavill's performance does an excellent job of it, I will say. And I can see the influence. Henry Cavill's doing his own thing, but Peter Kenny's vocal performance is fantastic. And I mean, I could go on all day talking about The Witcher and the Witcher series, and his vocal performance for Jasker, Dandelion, whoever you ask, is really great too. There's this whole thing where they're like trying to catch a fish. He's like, "Oh, we'll catch it and use its head for soup." He's like gives such a great performance that I kind of miss reading it, or I miss in the books or the video games or something. This like funny dialogue and the willingness to go there is so great. He has to voice all these kinds of creatures and things too, all these different mythical beings and political figures and all of that. So he does a great job. I've listened to the entire series. I would definitely recommend The Last Wish and The Sword of Destiny for sure. And if you like those, then finish the series. But I do think that those two are the best that the Witcher series has to offer. So, and they are the introduction to The Witcher. And I think it's the format that best fits like the narrative style of what Andrzej Sapkowski, the author of these books, was trying to achieve, because it all is inspired by fairy tales, like a grim fairy tale kind of telling. So the fact that these are like these short stories add to that. So, I mean, I just highly recommend, and I could rant about it for days. You can hear me on Fiction Fans and on our own podcast ramble on and on about it. But for now, just know, highly recommend, if you want to hear Geralt, like early inception of the voice of Geralt, check out The Last Wish, narrated by Peter Kenny, written by Andrzej Sapkowski.
Beautifully stated, Charles. I always love hearing you champion The Witcher. You're such a good proponent for this series.
Well, now that it's a popular video game and Netflix series, I don't really have to that much, but
yeah. But you've been all in on The Witcher for a while, and you got me into it. I definitely enjoyed reading The Last Wish, and The Sword of Destiny, and I bounced back and forth between the audiobook and a physical copy.
Oh, you did catch some of the audiobook.
I caught, yeah, it was mostly physical, but I think I was listening. There's a part where Peter King was singing. It was like I'm trying to remember. There's that story where it starts off with like a king falling in love with a mermaid or something?
Oh, yeah. Tree knots or something like that. She knots.
Sure, yeah. And they're singing, and I was like, okay.
Because to speak like a mermaid, you have to sing, and Geralt is the least likely guy to sing ever. So he's trying to speak to him. He's like, she knots. He's trying to say he loves you. Like, I can't do it.
Exactly.
I'm not an award-winning vocal
you're nailing
performer,
it. You're nailing it.
Like, that's the kind of thing. That's a great story.
Oh, yeah. So that was a fun one. And
A Little Sacrifice, I think it's called.
Yes, A Little Sacrifice, right. The commitment to do Geralt gruff voice, which, like you said, I do think Henry Cavill probably modeled. I don't know. It was interesting to hear the audiobook after watching the Netflix series, because I was like, this is like the same voice that Cavill is doing. So it does feel that way. And also then for Peter Kenny to have the commitment to sing in Geralt voice while doing this, like, okay, you're going in, and that's what we love to see. So I highly recommend those audiobooks as well. Charles always does a stronger job with this series, but I'll definitely throw my hat in the ring of recommending that one.
No, I'm glad that you heard it. Yeah, that's a fun one, a Little Sacrifice. Not the most exciting, but a great story nonetheless, and a great seg into the Fiction Fan stuff and the trailer that just came out. It's a very exciting time to be a Witcher fan, and I will say, like, the first season of the show takes a lot from the short stories of The Last Wish and some from The Sword of Destiny. So you can't go wrong if you watch the first season of the show and and you played the video games and that's your entire exposure. There is an extra rewarding experience in these books and the audiobooks, and you get to get more into the world of The Witcher, and it almost kind of boosts your understanding and appreciation of the show and the game. So highly recommend for all you Witcher video game or Witcher TV show fans out there to give these a try. And with that,
well
guys,
said, Charles.
Thank you. And I think we've done it all. Is there anything else you want to say about these audiobooks, Dylan, before we wrap it up?
I'm just thinking that there's so many more that it might be worth us doing another. We have all sorts of episode formats and stuff to do here, so I'm sure it might be a while before we get back to it. But there's just a bunch of audiobooks that are still coming up in my mind, and I'm sure for you too.
I'd be down to open it up to Twitter and get some recommendations too, because I'm always looking for new stuff. Because I said in the top, I love audiobooks and listening to audiobooks. It's like a part of my ritual every day. So like if there's ones that people recommend that I haven't tried, I'm always down. There's sometimes when we open up the recommendation series, it might have a little bit of selfish intentions, because I'm like, I want some stuff for my TBR, like, come on, I want to know what people are out there listening to. So I feel like that might be in the cards in the not too distant future. And then if we can sneak some of our own in on top of that, any excuse we have would be great. But I'm not going to commit to anything right now on the show, but I think that's a very strong possibility.
Yeah, I would love to do that. It's been a while since we did one of those call for Rex. We're probably due.
Yes, we are.
I say that like it's not my responsibility.
You're the social media guru. You champion these things, but it's fine. It's
been a while.
It's been a while.
What's happening? Okay. I'll get on it.
Yeah, well, we'll come up with something to throw out there into the Twitter sphere, but for now, I think it's been a long time coming to get that sweet, sweet outro music out, Dylan. What do you say to that?
I want to drop a Geralt singing voice, but I don't have enough confidence in my singing voice and be like, tell you in that voice to play that sweet, sweet outro music. But instead, I'll just say, play that sweet, sweet outro music, Charles.
All right, let's get that outro music pumping. Thank you, everyone, one and all, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. If you like what you heard today, if you've liked hearing some of these audiobooks, perhaps, or have some recommendations you want to send our way, well, the best place to support us and the best place to communicate with us is over on Twitter at the FTF Podcast with the number 1 at the end, and on Instagram at the FTF Podcast. And Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they want to support the show even further than their support on social media, and they just so happen to be listening on Apple Podcasts, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast. Just find that Friends Talking Fantasy page on the Apple Podcast app. Click the Friends Talking Fantasy page, scroll down past all those episodes until you start seeing stars. Once you're seeing stars, the optimal number of stars to click in order to support the show would be 5 of them. If you have a little bit of extra time, then writing a review is extremely helpful for a podcast like ours. But just listening is more than enough.
Guys,
thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate it. You guys are awesome. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.